My name is Juliana Carter. I am 31 years old, a landscape designer in Denver. 3 years ago, my life shattered in a single evening because my sister reached for what was mine and my fiancé reached back. I remember the air that night. Roasted green chile from the kitchen, cut limes, cottonwood sap after a short rain. It was the eve of our engagement party in Santa Fe at the low adobe house. The courtyard was strung with paper lanterns. My mother hummed over a pot of beans. My father carried chairs to the portal. Marcus stood beside me, kind in that measured way that lets your shoulders drop. He believed in calendars and clean counters. I believed in terraces and shade. Together we made plans that felt like safe architecture. Serena arrived early, of course. She always did. My younger sister has a way of slipping into rooms and rearranging gravity. The week before the party, she charmed the florist, adjusted a seating chart I had checked twice, and insisted on handling the playlist. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself she was excited for me. Even then, odd currents moved through the room. The way Serena's hand hovered on Marcus' sleeve when she teased him. The private jokes that did not include me. A glance across the table that pressed cold against my ribs. I swallowed doubt and smiled because love, I had learned, wants to be trusted even when your gut begs you to listen. The night of the party came fast. Friends and relatives filled the courtyard, the lanterns swaying like warm moons. Marcus looked handsome, nervous as if he felt the weight of the promise we were making. I wore a blue dress he once said made my eyes look like monsoon sky. Midway through the evening, a cool breeze moved over the flagstones and lifted goosebumps along my arms. I went inside for a shawl. The hallway was dim, late sun sliding in thin bands through the Vegas. That was when I heard it. Two voices, low and too close. A breathless laugh I knew as well as my own name. I turned toward my father's study. They were there, Marcus standing too near, Serena's fingers at the base of his neck. Their bodies leaned in the way magnets do when someone stops holding them apart. Time did not slow. It quit. My breath stayed in my throat like a held note. They did not see me at first. In that small window, everything I had edited out arranged into an ugly truth. Marcus looked up. Serena blinked. No apology arrived. Silence did. I set the shawl on the chair and walked away. Before dawn, I wrote 4 words on a scrap of paper, tucked it beneath the salt cellar, and stepped into the pale road. I need more time. Back in Denver, the world felt smaller than I remembered. My apartment was only a 1-bedroom loft with wide windows that once gave me comfort. But after Santa Fe, they seemed to press inward like glass walls. The air smelled of dust and paint thinner from my latest project drafts, and the silence became its own heavy companion. I unpacked nothing except the essentials. Engagement photographs, cards with looping congratulations, the champagne cork Marcus had saved. I pushed them into a cardboard box, slid it into the back of the closet, and buried it under winter coats. Out of sight, not out of mind. I blocked Marcus's number. I muted Serena's name on every platform. Yet small things still ambushed me. His cologne clung to a scarf I had forgotten to wash. Her laugh came back to me on the street when a stranger answered their phone. The body keeps score even when the mind refuses to. So I worked. Early mornings at the design firm. 12-hour days with soil samples and 3D renderings. I redrafted plans no one had asked me to, convinced that if I stayed busy enough, I could crowd out the ache. My boss called me dedicated. My coworkers called me unstoppable. In truth, I was hiding behind exhaustion. Fatigue was armor. If I collapsed into sleep the second I came home, I would not replay the study in Santa Fe, the look on Marcus's face when he saw me, or the way Serena did not flinch. Weeks blurred into months. Denver went from summer's dry heat to autumn's gold. I watched cottonwood leaves litter the streets through my office window, the city buzzing around me while I remained a ghost moving from one blueprint to the next. Friends invited me out, and I always declined. The barista at my favorite cafe memorized my order but never my smile, because I had forgotten how to offer it. 6 months passed before an invitation arrived. It was a small envelope, hand-addressed, slipped beneath my apartment door. Inside was a card for a local gallery opening downtown, featuring a new series of landscape photographs. The name was faintly familiar, an old college friend of a friend, someone I had met years earlier at a seminar. For a long while, I stood with the card between my fingers, torn. I had built a fortress out of routine, and stepping beyond it felt dangerous. Yet stubbornness pushed me. I refused to let Serena and Marcus define the size of my world. If I shrank any smaller, I might disappear entirely. So on a Friday evening in November, I dressed in the only black dress that still felt like mine, wrapped a scarf tight around my throat, and stepped into the cold. I told myself it was only an art show. I told myself it meant nothing. But in the deepest corner of me, a flicker of something almost forgotten stirred. Not hope yet, simply defiance. A refusal to stay invisible forever. And that was enough to make me walk into the night. The gallery smelled of varnish and wine. The walls glowed with framed photographs. Sweeping deserts, stormy oceans, city skylines caught at twilight. People murmured in soft voices, glasses clinking, the low hum of a jazz trio in the corner. I lingered near the entrance, clutching my coat like a shield, already planning how quickly I could leave without drawing attention. That was when I saw him, Adrian Wells. Taller than I remembered, shoulders relaxed, posture that suggested calm even in a crowded room. We had met once years ago at a dinner Marcus hosted, though he had barely spoken that night. Serena had teased him for being too serious, too quiet, as if a man who listened had no value. I remembered that look on his face, the same quiet patience he carried now. He noticed me before I could disappear into the swirl of guests. His eyes lit, not with surprise exactly, but recognition. He stepped closer with an easy grace, holding his glass at his side. "Juliana Carter," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I almost didn't believe it was you." For a moment, I forgot how to answer. My throat tightened, my mind searching for words that did not sound broken. Finally, I managed, "It's been a long time." My tone felt awkward, like a dress that no longer fit, but Adrian only smiled. He did not ask about Marcus. He did not mention Serena. He asked about my work, my designs, whether I still preferred sketching by hand or if I had surrendered fully to digital tools. He asked which parks in Denver I thought were most beautiful in autumn. He asked as if he cared about the answer, and when I spoke, he listened without rushing to fill the air. We drifted through the gallery side by side, pausing in front of a photograph of red cliffs at dusk. He told me he had taken it on a long trip alone through Utah, chasing light until the camera could no longer see. His words were quiet but carried a pulse of conviction. I found myself leaning closer, not to hear better, but because something about him made space feel safe. That night, I went home lighter than I had in months. It was not a whirlwind romance that swept me off my feet. It was something smaller, steadier. The following week, we crossed paths again, this time at a park, rain dripping through pine branches, him with a camera slung over his shoulder. Another week, we shared coffee at a small cafe, steam curling between us. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my world began to shift. With Adrian, I was not a woman defined by betrayal. I was simply Juliana, a person worth listening to, worth knowing. His silences were not empty. They were invitations to breathe. And for the first time since Santa Fe, I let myself inhale without fear of what came next. 2 years passed before I realized the rhythm Adrian and I had built was no longer temporary. It was a life. Not the kind of life filled with announcements, hashtags, and carefully staged photographs, but one that grew quietly in the cracks of ordinary days. He left his camera bags by the door. I left my design sketches scattered across the kitchen table, and somehow it all felt intentional. Real. When he asked me to marry him, there was no performance. No velvet box under candlelight, no audience waiting to gasp. He placed a simple silver band on the counter while we brewed coffee one rainy morning. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice even, as though he was asking if I wanted cream. My throat tightened, not from shock, but from the way it felt so right, so unforced. I said yes without hesitation. There was no one else who needed to hear it. We married in a courthouse on a gray Tuesday. The clerk read vows in a voice that sounded like it had read thousands before ours. We exchanged rings, small promises carved into metal. Our witnesses were 2 elderly strangers from the waiting bench who smiled as though they had been waiting their whole lives to remind someone that love still existed. Rain tapped against the glass panes. I wore a navy dress. He wore a jacket still damp at the shoulders. It was imperfect. It was ours. Afterward, we walked 2 blocks to a bakery and split a pastry, laughing when the flaky crust scattered across his tie. No one photographed it. No one posted it. That was the point. Our marriage was not for display. It was for us, built with intention, shielded from the noise that had once ruined me. I no longer needed approval or applause. I needed peace, and he gave it to me. At home, our loft became sanctuary. Exposed brick lined the walls. Ivy plants clung stubbornly to corners, and the air always smelled faintly of coffee and paint. Adrian filled the shelves with photo albums from his travels. I stacked mine with design books and sketch pads. At night, we cooked together, sometimes burning dinner, sometimes succeeding, but always laughing. We hosted friends who knew nothing about Marcus or Serena, people who saw only the woman I was now, not the one broken years ago. It was not a grand love story in the way people like to tell them, but it was steady, honest, and unshakably real. For the first time, I felt the kind of safety that does not need proving. There was no lingering fear of betrayal, no shadows creeping from the corners of my memory. With Adrian, life was simple, and in its simplicity, I discovered something I had once believed I lost forever: joy. It was a late afternoon in March when the phone rang. The screen lit with a name I had not seen in years: my grandfather. His voice, when I answered, carried a softness that startled me. Age had thinned it, but the warmth was unchanged. "Jules," he said, still using the nickname only he had ever earned the right to. "I am turning 82 next month. I want one dinner, just the family. One night together before time runs away from me." My chest tightened. He had always been the one to send a card on my birthday after I disappeared, the one who somehow knew about my courthouse wedding, even though no one told him. He never asked questions, never judged, just a line in his shaky handwriting. "I hope you are happy. So we love always." If anyone deserved my presence, it was him. Adrian was rinsing dishes at the sink, and I knew he had heard the tremor in my voice. When I hung up, he dried his hands and came closer. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "You owe them nothing." His hand found mine, steady and patient. I looked into his eyes, the calm he carried like a shield. "I know," I whispered, "but I think I want to. For him, not for them." The weeks leading up to the dinner gnawed at me. My work sketches blurred, my sleep fractured into restless fragments. Memories clawed back in small ways. Serena's laugh echoing down hallways. Marcus's cologne spilling from an old scarf I thought I had thrown away. I tried to bury it, but anticipation has a cruel way of sharpening old wounds. The day of the dinner, Adrian and I drove south from Denver. The landscape shifted from sharp mountain air to the dry, sun-baked openness of New Mexico. The closer we came to Santa Fe, the heavier the air seemed, as if memory itself thickened around me. Each highway sign tugged at my ribs, names of towns I had once passed with Marcus, gas stations where Serena had picked snacks, all of it pressing against me like ghosts. When we turned onto my parents' street, the light was already turning gold. Their adobe house looked almost unchanged. The same cracked wind chime clattered on the porch, the same rose bushes, overgrown now, bent toward the path. The front door creaked like it always had. For a moment, I was 29 again, trembling in a hallway, watching my life split apart without a sound. I gripped the handle of my seat until Adrian touched my shoulder. "You are not that woman anymore," he said softly. I exhaled and nodded. Inside, the house smelled of roasted chile and lemon polish. My mother greeted us with surprise too carefully arranged, her smile polite but thin. My father nodded once before disappearing back to the oven. No mention of the years lost, no apology hanging in the air, just a silence that pretended nothing had ever happened. I set my coat aside and looked toward the dining room, where the table was being dressed in old linens. And then I heard them. 2 voices. Familiar. Too familiar. Serena's light, sharp laugh. Marcus's lower tone, trailing behind hers. My heartbeat stumbled. I did not turn. Not yet. But I knew this dinner would not pass quietly. Something was waiting in that room, and this time I would not walk away. The dining room gleamed under the low chandelier, its bulb softened with yellow shades that made everything look warmer than it felt. My mother handed me a stack of silverware, her smile quick and practiced. We laid forks and knives side by side on linen that had seen decades of holidays. She spoke only of mundane things: the neighbor's new puppy, the grocery prices. Not once did she touch the silence that yawned between us. My father carried in a roast, muttered about timing, and returned to the kitchen. It was as if my absence had been folded into family history and stitched over. I heard them before I saw them. The quick staccato of Serena's heels, the slower thud of Marcus's shoes 2 beats behind. The sound alone was enough to drag me backward in time, to nights when she commanded the room and he trailed after her like an accessory. My chest tightened, but I forced my hands to steady, aligning each fork against the plate. When they stepped into the room, I finally turned. Serena swept in first, draped in emerald silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus followed, his suit neat but his face drawn, as though someone had siphoned the color out of him. Serena's eyes locked on me, and for the briefest moment her stride faltered. Then she recovered, tilting her chin in that familiar posture of superiority. "Well," she said brightly, "look who decided to come crawling out of Denver." "Didn't think you remembered where home was, I didn't blink." "Nice to see you too, Serena." Her gaze flicked quickly to my left hand, then back up. A smirk twisted her lips. "Still playing the lone wolf, I see," she said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. I smoothed the edge of the tablecloth and lifted my eyes. "Actually, no. I'm married." The air shifted instantly. My mother's hands froze on the salad bowl. My father paused with the wine decanter. Even the quiet hum of conversation from the kitchen seemed to stop. Serena's expression flickered. Not long enough for most to catch, but I saw it. The tiniest crack in her armor. Marcus's brows knit together. Confusion and something else I couldn't name. "My husband will be here any minute," I added evenly, sliding a chair into place. Traffic was heavy. As if summoned, the front door creaked open. The sound of a coat settling on the rack carried through the hallway, then footsteps calm and unhurried. Adrian appeared in the doorway wearing a tailored navy jacket, eyes scanning until they landed on me. He crossed the room without hesitation, bent to kiss my temple, his hand resting at my waist with effortless familiarity. "Sorry I'm late," he murmured. "Accident on the highway." I looked past his shoulder. Serena's mouth hung slightly open, her practiced charm dissolving. Marcus sat stiff, his fork motionless above his plate. Adrian pulled out the chair beside mine, his palm brushing against mine on the table. And just like that, the balance in the room shifted. For the first time in years, I was no longer the one standing alone. Dinner began in silence, broken only by the scrape of utensils against china. My grandfather lifted his glass, his hand trembling but steady enough to command attention. "To family," he said, voice thin but resolute. "To forgiveness, if we are brave enough. And to the hope that even old roots can bloom again." We raised our glasses. His eyes lingered on me, a small wink reminding me that he knew more than he ever said. Conversation tried to rise, my mother asking Adrian about his work, my father offering short nods. But the tension settled like smoke. Serena pushed food around her plate, her shoulders tight. Marcus chewed slowly, gaze fixed downward. I sat upright, Adrian's hand resting lightly over mine, his presence anchoring me in the storm. Then came the sound of glass tapping. Cling, cling, cling. Serena stood, holding her wine as though it were a microphone. She smiled too widely. "I would like to say a few words," she began, syrup in her tone, "about my dear sister Juliana. It is quite something, really, to vanish for years and then reappear with a husband none of us has met. Bold. I'll give her that." I felt the knot in my stomach tighten, but I did not look away. I had walked through fire once. I would not flinch at sparks. "Some of us believe in transparency," Serena continued, her gaze narrowing like a blade. "But I suppose others prefer secrecy. It makes one wonder, doesn't it? What is being hidden?" A chair scraped hard against the floor. Marcus stood. His voice, when it came, cut through the air like glass breaking. "That's enough, Serena." She blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" You don't have to do this, he said, his tone low but firm. Not tonight. Not anymore, her face hardened. Do what? Tell the truth? Point out that I said enough. His words landed with finality. The table stilled. My father lowered his fork. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Serena stared at Marcus, disbelief flaring in her eyes. Whatever power she once held over him was gone, replaced by something hollow. She scoffed, grabbed her glass, and stormed toward the patio, heels snapping against the floor. Marcus hesitated, then followed, his expression vacant, as if the weight of his choices had finally settled on his shoulders. Neither of them returned. The rest of us ate in quiet. The roast cooled, the rolls went untouched. My grandfather sipped his wine and gave me a look of quiet pride, as though to say, "You stood your ground. That is enough." Adrian squeezed my hand beneath the table. In that moment, I understood. The storm had already broken, and I no longer lived beneath its shadow. The plates had been cleared, the table left half-finished when the night finally exhaled. My grandfather leaned heavily on Adrian's arm as he returned to his armchair by the fireplace. I followed, gathering stray napkins and stacking glasses, small motions that steadied my racing heart. My mother approached with a thin smile and a hug that felt more like formality than affection. My father muttered about the weather, his eyes fixed anywhere but mine. No one mentioned Serena. No one spoke of Marcus. It was as if silence had become the only language they still trusted. Outside, the porch light flickered against the desert night. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of garden soil and lemon pie left on the counter. I paused at the top step, looking back at the house that had once held both my dreams and my undoing. The walls were the same, the roof unchanged, but the weight they carried no longer belonged to me. Adrian slipped his hand into mine. "You okay?" he asked quietly. His voice was not probing, only offering. I nodded, my gaze steady. "For the first time in a long time," I said, and I meant it. The ache I once thought permanent had softened into something else. Acceptance, maybe even release. We walked to the car in silence, but it was not the silence of absence. It was the silence that heals, the kind that lets you breathe deeper. The headlights cut across the gravel as Adrian started the engine. I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror, its glow fading into darkness, and felt no pull to turn back. As the road stretched out before us, I understood the truth. This was never about revenge. It was about freedom. Clara and Marcus were part of my past, but they did not own my future. What I carried forward was not betrayal, but proof that even the deepest wounds can scar into strength. Life will hand us betrayals sharp enough to split us in two, but healing does not come from revenge. It comes from choosing peace, even when anger feels easier. I once believed Serena and Marcus had stolen my future, yet what they took was only a version of a life I was never meant to keep. What I built with Adrian was quieter, steadier, and infinitely more real. The lesson is simple but hard to live. Do not measure yourself by the cruelty of others or the weight of their choices. Instead, measure yourself by the courage it takes to walk away, to protect what is sacred, and to choose love that listens. Family may wound you, but you are never defined by the silence or the scorn they leave behind. The true triumph is not in making them small, it is in making yourself whole.